Welcome to Driftwood Conversations. I'm Hillary Sloan. My guest today is Danielle Frank, author of A Wine Lover's Guide to Parenting and a longtime executive in the wine and spirits industry. Danielle's story is one of unexpected pivots. She began her career in the film industry with Miramax, moved from New York to Los Angeles, navigated major career changes and a broken engagement, and the realization that her life would not follow the traditional timeline she had once imagined. Danielle has learned to embrace moments of change as part of her curriculum for living. In this conversation, we explore resilience, creativity, kindness, storytelling, travel, and the freedom that can emerge when we stop measuring our lives against someone else's checklist. Here's my conversation with Danielle Frank. Hi, Danielle. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
You wrote a book, and this is part of why you're on podcast right now, to introduce the book. Am I correct?
It is. I wrote a book and I've been doing the podcast circuit, but, as we chatted about, as I was going on these podcasts, the greater story that I've shared with many podcasts and audiences like yours is really, the backstory of me and how my story is rooted in transformation and the kind that doesn't happen all at once, but through a series of unexpected pivots. I like to say I've lived multiple plot twists. I shifted careers from the entertainment world into wine and spirits. I moved from New York to LA. I navigated a broken engagement when I realized, the future I thought I was headed towards, including motherhood, might not be the one meant for me. And so instead of, letting those detours define me, I learned to rewrite the story altogether. And that's why I love speaking openly today about bucking traditional timelines and embracing the life that looks different than the unexpected quote unquote checklist, and discovering the freedom and the humor and the purpose in the unplanned, because sometimes the most meaningful life begins when the original plan ends.
That is the story that I'm interested in, and the people that come to Driftwood Conversations. So it's the creative urge. We keep creating new lives, creating new projects, creating. When you went through these shifts, what was that like? Was it difficult?
Well, I think, every shift, every pivot gives you information for the next one. And that's how I used it. My first big pivot was moving from New York to LA. Of course, it was scary, but I was young at the time, my late 20s. So, I didn't have a family that I was lugging cross country with me. I didn't have a mortgage or anything like that to worry about that. So, there is a little naivety, and I don't want to say naivety, but, you are able to be a little bit brazen, because there isn't a lot weighing on your shoulders. But each life change gives you information, and it's how you're using that. And so, the first real pivot moving, that sort of like builds up your armory or arsenal to know, that the next pivot that comes your way, you can do it. So with each new subsequent life change or pivot, like when I switched from entertainment into the wine and spirits world, having gone through the big move from New York to LA, all those little things give you information and build up your confidence to give you the belief in yourself that you can do it. You can tackle a change and you can try it. It's all about taking the lessons and extracting the lessons from each pivot, each point.
Is there anything you think inside you, deep inside, that really supports your resilience? Do you have a spiritual practice, a meditation or a religion, anything or friendships that really help you?
I think it's not spiritual. It's not meditation. I'm way too into my head to meditate all the time. But I think what it is, the independence and confidence I've built in myself since a young age. I grew up with divorced parents. My parents divorced when I was 1. And another podcast asked me once, like, if you could go back to your, 12-year-old self or 13-year-old self, what would you tell yourself to do differently? And I said, not a blessed thing. Everything has happened as it should. That's what I believe. Everything has made me the person that I am. So I bring that up because, I grew up, my parents divorced when I was 1. Was it easy? No. It was hard being shuffled between two parents. My dad remarried, but those battle scars are what, like, I learned to be very independent at a very young age, a single mom. I learned when I woke up early on Saturday to make myself breakfast. And so I think, it all comes from just like, the confidence you instill in yourself. And that's really what I've built in myself at a young age, is doing things on my own and giving myself the confidence and continue to believe in myself.
What did you do in the film industry?
So I worked for Miramax Films. I was in the international PR department. So we would be promoting our films with the talent all over the world, going to the Venice Film Festival, Cannes Film Festival, press tours to Paris, London, Rome. It was fantastic. I would go to LA practically every month for press junkets. So that started my, actually, I had a love for LA when I visited a friend there in college, but that continued my love for LA and really created that desire to actually move there.
So how did you decide to leave Miramax? That's a big move. That's probably a good paycheck and a travel everything. Man, that would
Well,
be wonderful.
the the travel was amazing. The life experiences were amazing. I'm so lucky and so blessed. Paycheck, not so amazing. I mean, they give you the title. By the end, I was VP of International PR in my late 20s, but, the salary didn't match. I mean, that was the entertainment industry, and especially New York Miramax was in its heyday then. It was the only studio in New York. That's where everybody wanted to work. So, the salaries were not that great because they know that if you don't want that job, someone else is in line to take it. And I'm sure, being in my late 20s, there was some naivety in accepting certain, salary terms and not fighting for more. But no, they weren't known to be notoriously great payers. So yeah, there was part of that was like, here I am, VP of International PR, but I'm living in a studio, and then there was that desire of, wow, for what I pay for my studio in LA, I can have a one bedroom and have closet space. What a concept. And then just with all my travels to LA, I kept falling in love with it. I made more and more friends out there. So, it was my late 20s and all my friends were starting that next journey of getting married, having kids. And I was kind of faced like at that fork in the road. I was with my boyfriend and I just was like, I can either go this path and go the path that everybody's going and get married and have kids. I said, but I'm not quite ready for that. There's plenty of time for that. I love this aspect of traveling the world. I love this aspect of seeing, other cities and cultures and everything like that. I said, there'll be plenty of time for me to get married and have kids. So I said, if I'm going to move to LA, now is the time. I'm going to do it now. So I did that. There were no studio jobs at the time, but one of the PR firms that represent talent that I worked with all the time, they were hiring. So that kind of gave me my window of opportunity. And I moved out in November of 2002.
That's great. So you were a talent agent?
Well, I was a publicist, but for a minuscule amount of time. And that's sort of where my next big transition came in from when I left the entertainment industry altogether and went into wine and spirits. So I joined this PR firm. And, I just, even before I accepted the job, I kind of knew personal PR was not going to be my avenue. No disrespect to personal publicists. It's just not what I had intended to do. On top of that, the company that I accepted a job with, unfortunately, was a very toxic environment. It was run by two women who had just very different, distinct personalities. And my first day walking into the office, I saw like three of the publicists like crying in their office. And I was like, what did I get myself into? So, and so that was a major lesson for me. When I was at Miramax, sure, I was in my 20s. Did I go out the night before and maybe I didn't feel like getting up and going to work? Yeah, of course. But there was never one day when I was at Miramax that I ever woke up with that uncomfortable pit in my stomach, that ulcer-inducing pit being like, oh, I don't want to go into the office. Never had that. When I was at this PR company, I was there 3 months. And within that 3-month period, I had multiple mornings where I just had that ulcer-inducing feeling. And that was another really big pivotal moment for me and a lesson that, to realize that when something isn't serving you, when it's the job or the relationship, which that's my later pivot, friendships, anything like that, when it's not serving you and it's affecting your health, it's important to make a change. We spend half of our lives at work. So I quit without having another job, which is very unlike me. I'm very type A. But I thought like my personal happiness was more important. And I just had confidence in myself, like I'll find something. But I wasn't finding anything in entertainment. And somebody told me about a job working for Bacardi USA. And I was like, oh, this sounds great. But my friend, was working, like loved this job. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, you work from home. It was a big step back. It was a very elementary position. So I took a major pay cut, but it was working from home. You got a, car allowance and this and that. And I was like, okay, this will be good while I look for my other job, while I figure things out. Next thing I know, I'm at Bacardi for 10 plus years. I quickly learned it's an amazing industry. I was very fortunate to work for an amazing company, a great company like Bacardi, and represent such amazing brands as Bacardi, Grey Goose, Bombay Sapphire Doers. And so I was there for 10 years, and now I've been working and currently working at Moet Hennessy for 12 plus years. And when you realize something isn't serving you, is, time to make a change. And I took a big change.
Were you doing PR for first one and now? Are you doing?
No, actually, I moved into it's a sales position. So yeah, interestingly enough, my interview, they said, "Well, you haven't done sales. Why are you a fit for this job?" And what I quickly realized was like, everything is telling a story. Everything's storytelling, right? And everything is selling something. At Miramax, at the PR agency, I'm selling the concept of the film. I'm selling this story. I'm selling the romanticism of, the character and this actor and their personality and who we want them to show up to, in the public eye. I said the same thing, it's sales is sales, whether you're selling an image or a person or a brand. And it's all about building storytelling, right? Creating romanticism for the buyer or the reader or, anything. And so I really bridged the gap. There was a lot of crossover, and it's amazing. It's what I enjoy best is the storytelling, and that it really transcends, different kinds of careers.
What kind of story do you tell when you're selling liquor? What do you use? What techniques?
When I'm talking about my brands, I mean, first of all, I currently work for Moet Hennessy, and our brands, Dom Perignon, Veuve Clicquot, Moet and Chandon. There's such history to them. I was just at a conference yesterday and we were telling the story about Madame Clicquot. She's essentially the first female entrepreneur. She took the realms of the champagne house, which is unheard of for a woman to do, and her husband died, and she was 27 years old. And there's a loophole in that time in the Napoleonic era because women were not allowed to have businesses, but there was a little loophole about widows being able to. And so she fought, her father-in-law and said, give me a chance. And he expected her to fail. And she built the house that we know today as Veuve Clicquot. She created the first blended rosé. She created the riddling rack, which is a process still used by champagne houses today, which is how we get the sediment out of champagne. Before that, champagne was cloudy. She created the first vintage champagne. So, we try and tell the romanticism, the story that way. But also for consumers, it's more about the romanticism of, the feeling of how it is when you have that glass of Veuve Clicquot, versus, maybe a less expensive sparkling. It's the romanticism and the feeling that it evokes out of you. And the memories. Is this a brand that you had with your grandmother or when you graduated college or, so we kind of just build that, that consumer desire through storytelling. You see it through the Instagram stories and all the brand pages. It's building that consumer desire. That's really the storytelling.
Now you're not doing any of that. You're just being the
Yeah, I
representative.
yeah, I don't do the marketing, but my role is I work with all the national hotel groups at a corporate level. So Four Seasons at the corporate level, Marriott. So I am building this story, and it is sort of a hybrid of marketing and sales of talking about these moments within their program of, St. Regis, for example, is, they call, one of their platforms is the House of Celebration. They're all about celebration. Well, so is Moet and Chandon. We are the champagne of celebration. So building those gaps, those connections of our brand to their brand, finding the common ethos of why our brand represents, what their hotel group stands for, what their customers are looking for, and building the story that way.
What does Dom Perignon stand for? I love it, by the way.
I mean, Dom Perignon is it's all about excellence and joie de vivre. It's culinary, it's arts. It's all about, we do artist collaborations, and it's really just about the joie de vivre of the finest. And that can be in, culinary, or, it's really just finding the pinnacle of sector: art, music, fashion, culinary.
Nice, nice. I've always loved that about them, actually. I love the bottle. I love their when they've sponsored artists. They used to do a lot of ads that were just incredible.
Yeah, we do
So
a lot of artists, and also the juice is not so bad inside the bottle either.
no, not at all. Yeah, I remember when I was married many years ago, my husband kept saying he didn't like champagne, and somebody brought us a bottle of Dom Perignon. You pronounce it. I'm not
Perignon,
getting it.
Perignon, Dom Perignon.
Perignon. Okay.
And I don't do it
Somebody,
as well as some of my French colleagues. I mean, the way they say like Ruinart and Krug, I don't say it very well. I don't have a good French accent, so I butcher some of them as well.
it's beautiful though. Somebody bought us a bottle for a wedding, and when John drank it, he said, "Oh, this is good." And I said, "See?"
Yeah, yeah. There's some, with any spirit, there's some great, wines, champagnes. There's some bad one. I don't want to say bad. That's, I don't want to poo-poo any brand, but it's all subjective too, right? Like what I may like may be different than what you like. Some people like sweet wines. I don't like. It's all really, we all have different palates. We all have different memories, like I said, of what it evokes out of us. So yeah, it's just about finding the what you like and enjoying it.
So how did that take you to your book?
So my book actually I wrote about 14 years ago, and that came about because I've always had a creative outlet. I mean, you've asked, sort of what's, you asked before about getting me through meditation or spiritual. One of the things that I just that's part of my ether. I have a creative side and I love writing, but writing is also therapy for me. So when I broke off my engagement, I was engaged to be married. He has kids from a first marriage. I always wanted to be a mom, and he said he would have a kid. Um, but as we got engaged and we were planning the wedding, we were only engaged a short time. When I realized he really didn't want more kids. I mean, look, there were other things wrong in the relationship. I think that was just finally the thing that opened my eyes of why I didn't want to go through with it. And so writing's my therapy. And at that same time, a couple things were happening. A book came out called Go the F to Sleep by Adam Mansbach, which was, it's written like a children's book, but it's made for adults. And it opened the door to this new genre of adult children's book. And I was watching my niece and nephew, who were young at the time, and although great kids, obviously every kid has the propensity to whine, and they were whining about something. And I said, Aunt Danielle drinks wine. She doesn't listen to wine. And so all these things came together. I'd just broken off my engagement, and I realized the path of motherhood might not happen for me, but I still want a seat at the table to how kids are raised. And so I had this idea of, oh, it's, and working in the wine industry, I started to think about all the fun parallels of wine terminology to human behavior. Letting your kids breathe, not letting them whine to get their way. Are they mulled wine, which is spiced or heated? So all these things just started to come together. And I thought, let me create this fun book for parents to be or new parents, really just reminding people about, just basic, instilling in your kids basic human decency. And you don't need to be a parent to know basic human behavior. Yeah, and it became and also it's my love letter also for those are interested in wine, because as somebody who works in the wine and spirits industry, I love making wine knowledge accessible. So everything in this book, every time I use wine terminology, I give the definition at the bottom. I give a basic understanding of how wine is made at the end of the book. So it's really just a fun humor book for anybody, wine lovers, parents, uncles, teachers, aunts, anybody.
Do you want to read a chapter now?
I would love to. So I will read a chapter called You Don't Want Your Kids to Ferment. So in the winemaking process, fermentation is when you convert sugar to alcohol. Well, we think sugar is something sweet. Alcohol, right, we think can sometimes be a little harsh or biting. So this is that you don't want your kids to turn from someone sweet into someone harsh and biting because they don't have manners. Manners, manners, manners are the key to it all. These lessons need to start even when they're small. Teach them this from day one before they start to crawl. You don't want your kid to be the sour grape in the bunch and turn into a spoiled brat that kids want to punch. When they start talking, make sure they know thank you and please, and to always say bless you when they hear someone sneeze. Please and thank you are an absolute must. Without that, your child's a total bust. There's nothing worse than a child who has behavior that is crude, because it'll continue as they're older and become someone who's rude. People don't take kindly to and aren't nice to those with attitude, because it's very off putting and puts others in a bad mood. Oftentimes causing confrontation and leads to a nasty feud, wanting to put a little bit of poison in your child's food. Is that really how you want your kids to be viewed? Wouldn't you prefer that there's someone who's wooed? Without manners, they'll ferment and turn into someone harsh and biting. They may turn into a kid who's rude, obnoxious, and always fighting. So teach your kids some manners and to have some heart and soul. Without that, your kid may well turn into an a-hole.
So when did this get published?
So as I said, I wrote it 14 years ago, but as you can imagine, getting published is very hard. You know, sending it to publishers, especially back then when we weren't using the internet as wildly as we are now. Every publisher had a different process. You had to write a cover letter. It was like applying to colleges all over again. Everybody had a new process. Agents don't want you unless you've been published. Publishers don't want you unless you have an agent. So I shelved it for quite some time. And, with self publishing picking up, that process still sort of daunted me a little bit. But then I heard about this hybrid publishing model, which is essentially self publishing, but you are paying for somebody to guide the process. It's somebody that used to work at a big publishing house. So I decided to, make the investment in the time and the money end of last year, and it got published around October of 2025.
So how's it doing?
It's hard. It's hard. It's really hard, and promoting a book is a full-time job on top of my full-time job and my Moet Hennessy day job that pays the bills. So that's priority number one. But it's also really fun to bring to life something, that you've created. I haven't been called by Today Show or Good Morning America yet telling me my book's gone viral. Do I want to be on? So nothing crazy yet, but I even just the small feedback of people that told me they've enjoyed it or they've gifted it to a baby shower. It's great. You pair it with a onesie, done. The feedback I've been getting is fantastic. But yeah, I would love for it to be shared with the world.
Now you said you love writing. So are you writing other things now?
Yeah, well, so I'm working on the second iteration of this book, A Whiskey Lover's Guide to Dog Breeds. So any publishers out there listening, that's available to be published. I'm not quite ready to embark on the publishing journey yet on my own with that. So, I have some actual children's book series that I'm working on. I have I have an idea for I had a great idea. I think it'd be a great screenplay and movie. It's like a whole serial killer story, but I'm not good at writing screenplay. So I wrote it as a short story and one day would like to write it as a novel. But, again, it's hard with a full-time job that takes my utmost priority. Writing is something, I do here and there, and I'll focus on when I'm in retirement at some point and dive heavy into that.
You said you were very creative. So how does your creativity feed you? And are you able to get enough of it right now?
Well, I mean, I'm probably not able to get enough of it because, I have all these ideas and all these projects that are just sitting on my computer, right? So it's definitely not feeding that desire to, of course you want to share it with the world. It took me 14 years to share this book alone, but it's a lot. It's a lot of work. My desires are not completely getting met because I'm not able to share my projects yet. But yeah, it's just really creativity like strikes me at any moment. So I'll just like come up with an idea and start writing it. So I have a lot of different ideas and it's probably some of it's a little scattered and they're not complete. So it's not fulfilled yet because I'm not at a place where I'm like, great, I have this idea. I'm going to finish it, start to, beginning to end and then move on to the next project. I just kind of like as inspiration strikes me, I hit the ground running.
So what's your next plan?
My next plan is to continue working my butt off with my day job so that I can get into retirement in a comfortable place so that I can, spend more time writing and traveling the world. I'm a big traveler. So, that's where I get a lot of my inspiration is just seeing all the different cultures and how people live and people's stories. The next book I am working on, which is pretty much finished, is The Whiskey Lover's Guide to Dog Breeds. So I think that will be the next one. If I self-publish, I'll bring to the forefront.
What's your favorite country or your favorite
Oh,
trip?
That's hard because I love to try. It was always Italy. Italy is just has a special place in my heart. I studied abroad there in college and I've been a zillion times since then. But France is up there right now. I would love to live half the year in France when I'm in retirement, or I love France so much. I love Paris. I love outside of the city. I love France.
You have a pet there. I heard a bark.
Yes, I was trying to mute myself to tell him to shush, but yes, my dog, apparently he barked because he doesn't like the idea of me moving to Paris someday.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of dog is it?
He's a Lab Husky Shiba mix. He's a total mutt, but he's adorable.
So, was he an influence for the dog book?
Yeah, I mean, of course, this book, A Wine Lover's Guide to Parenting, of course, people say, oh, well, you're not a parent. And I said, again, I was a bonus mom for many years to my ex's kids. I'm very engaged in my niece and nephew's lives. I'm Aunt Danielle to many kids' lives. But as I said, it also came from a desire to wanting a seat at the table to how kids are raised. These, future generations are, younger generations are the future of our society who are going to be running our country. And we see how important it is more than ever these days to have people with empathy and kindness and not discriminate and so forth. So, so that book was really, wanting a seat at that table. But yeah, so my desire with this was, well, all my friends are, pet lovers or dog lovers. So I need something specific for us as well. And yeah, I'm a big animal lover. So I had to do something for the dogs. And I love a good whiskey. So
That's an interesting, it's sort of a bold choice, both of them. It stands up. Courage. What, yeah, what do you think is your finest attribute?
my finest attribute, I think, is empathy. I think kindness. I think that's the most important attribute anybody could or should have. I mean, we just need more kindness. And I think that's the thing I'm most proud of. When I look at everything in my life, I appreciate, I listen, I love my boldness, my confidence in myself, brave to make new choices, but being kind, I think, is the thing I'm most proud of. It really makes me fulfilled to be a kind person and to give back. And, you know, I just think it's a lost art for some people. And I just, I think there's not enough kindness, and I value that about myself.
That's lovely. We do need more. Absolutely. Is there anything else you'd like to say or add to this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, just for all the listeners, my own story, as I said, is sort of rooted in transformation. And as I said, I love shining a light on, embracing life's pivots. And even when they don't match your quote unquote checklist, by embracing the pivot, it really can be empowering. It can be rewarding. And, the pivot isn't a failure. It really is the curriculum. And, same thing as, I hate to say failures because I don't think of anything as a failure, but, your missteps or things that you think are not going your way, they're just the curriculum for your story. And it's going to lead you onto a journey that maybe you were meant to be on all along.
That's great. Why don't you tell me how people can find your book?
They can find my book online at Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. They can find me at DanielleFrankAuthor.com or on Instagram at Create a Great Story.
Oh, that's great. I love that. I will look it up. Thank you, Danielle.
Thank
And
you so much for having me.
thank you, Danielle, for this honest conversation. I'm always interested in how people navigate life, what they do when things don't go as planned, how they adapt, what they learn along the way, and how they discover joy in the midst of it all. You've been listening to Driftwood Conversations. My guest today was Danielle Frank, author of A Wine Lover's Guide to Parenting. To learn more about Danielle and her work, visit DanielleFrankAuthor.com. You can also find her on Instagram at Create a Great Story. If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow, rate, and review Driftwood Conversations wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find more conversations, essays, and reflections on my Substack, Driftwood Conversations. I'm Hillary Sloan. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep paying attention to the stories that shape us and the moments that connect us.